Hello, everyone. My name is Allison Boyven, and I am on the marketing team here at Riverside Insights. And I will be your host for today's webinar alongside Anna Hausman. She is our Group Product Marketing Director, and we are both former classroom teachers and district administrators in assessment. I'd like to thank you very much for joining today, taking the time to join in this session of Hear from Your Peers to discuss best practices to gain data insights with your achievement reports and scores at the diocesan or district level, at the school level, and then down at the classroom and into the student levels. So before we get started today, we do have a few announcements to share with you. We have two upcoming webinars for which we hope you will join us. One is on April the 12th, and it will be on the benefits of universal screening and equitable identification processes with Jonathan Klingman and the State College in Pennsylvania. And another webinar will be on April the 27th with Trumbull County Educational Service Center, and they will talk about using achievement and ability data together to identify students for gifted programs. During today's session, you may have questions that you would like answered from our panelists. So please type those in the chat on the right side of your screen, and it may look something similar to this image shown here. And today's session is being recorded, so you will receive a recording and a certificate of attendance in the next about 2 days. So be on the lookout for that in your inbox. And all recordings from our previous webinars can be found on our website at info.riversideinsights.com/K12PD. And this is what it looks like here. So opening this page will provide this header shown here. So on to today's presentation and discussion. We are really excited to have with us administrators from two dioceses in Missouri. We have Dr. Aaron Vader, Heather Shrimp, and Catherine Colson from the Diocese of Jefferson City. And we have Dr. Karen Hobson and Linda Coswaite from the Diocese of Kansas City, St. Joseph. So they have many highlights to share from their numerous data meetings and discussions, and looking at the positive impact that data has on student growth and classroom instruction. So welcome, and we are very glad to have you with us today. So to get us started, please, if you all can share with us some information about your diocese, where it's located, the size and grade levels that you all serve, and the schools, that would be great. So Dr. Vader, if you want to kick us off, it's great.
Sure. We are the Diocese of Jefferson City, located in central Missouri, friendly way to call it mid-mo. It's a big diocese, 38 counties. I've been here 3 years now, and oftentimes, no offense to my colleagues in the West, but I forget that there's more of Missouri other than my diocesan map. We are a decidedly rural, mostly rural area. Our largest city would be Columbia, where Mizzou is located. They have about 100,000 residents there in Columbia. Our diocese, we have 37 elementary schools, 2 diocesan high schools, 1 K through 12 school. We have a wide range of populations within our schools. We do have a school that has 25 kids in it, and we have a high school that has about 720 kids in it right now. The most, besides the awesome people that work in our diocese, the most interesting thing I think about us is that we're one of only 2 stewardship dioceses in the country, which means that if your family is an active parishioner in a Catholic church, and you want your child to go to Catholic school, the parish sponsors your child to go there. So there is no tuition for our K-8 families that are active parishioners in our churches, which is a pretty interesting thing. We have 75,000 Catholics in our diocese, and we have just under 7,000 kids in our schools. So we're very proud, and we love what we do.
Thank you. And Dr. Hobson or Linda, would you like to share about Diocese of Kansas City?
Absolutely. So we are the Diocese of Kansas City, St. Joseph. So we are on the Kansas-Missouri border, and our diocese educates students from the Kansas City metro area up to St. Joe, Missouri, and then also some rural Missouri areas. So Chillicothe, Marysville, Clinton, and Montrose. And so we have 23 elementary schools, and we have 3 diocesan high schools, and then we also have 6 standalone ECC buildings throughout our diocese. So we work with infants through 12th grade, depending on what is available at each of our schools. So we have a wide range of students that we work with, and our enrollment is anywhere from 44 students at Montrose all the way up to our largest school is around 500 students. And so we have just a tremendous amount of Catholic educators that work with our students every day and have embraced the idea of using data through the Iowa Flex testing to really support all of the learners in our building.
Wonderful. So if you all could share a little bit about the role that assessments play within your diocese and how you determine which assessments that the students are going to receive, and then do schools have a choice in that decision making?
Well, we have 2 diocesan mandated assessments, our Iowa assessments that we do every fall, and an ACRE assessment, which is done through NCEA that basically we do 3 times during a student's school career that gives us an idea of their faith development. We use the Iowa so that we can have an apples to apples sort of comparison for school to school, and also longitudinal understanding within a school. It's hard. I was in a diocese where we changed our diocesan mandated assessment, and then we changed it again a couple years later. And it made any sort of longitudinal data very difficult to gather because you didn't know that you were comparing. It made it very difficult to compare the learning, making sure it was adjusted to the standards properly, all of that. So what I've really appreciated is the fact that we have such a broad scale of data available to look at across the years. We do have some schools who use other benchmarks testing, and that's up to them, but we do mandate that one test so that we can look at it across the board, across all our schools. And we do review assessments. The principals are involved in all of that. It would be very, I guess, easy, but not very smart for me to mandate changes at my level. So we look at it as we're all very collaborative in that.
Dr. Vader, right now, kind of a couple years post-COVID, when I know a lot of districts and dioceses are focused on getting kiddos back to where they were from an academic standpoint pre-COVID, how are you using these, diocesan mandated assessments to really look at what's happening in your diocese and ensure that kids are making the growth that they need to make post-COVID?
Well, I don't know if I'm the right person to talk to you about that because we've seen no learning loss due to COVID. We've been waiting for that other shoe to drop for a couple of years now, and it hasn't. I take zero credit for this. This is all my principals and my teachers and the superintendent who was here before me. Our schools were we were out from that March through May of 2020. And during that time, our schools pivoted beautifully to virtual learning. And my principals and the superintendent at the time made the very wise decision to not stop grading. And so our kids they still had skin in the game and they kept up with what they needed to do. So it's been the easiest way for me to get sort of a snapshot view of what's happening is we look at where our kids are scoring in terms of their, grade level and compare it to the national. We do a diocesan average, and we have our national average and we see where everybody is comparing up with that. And honestly, we've stayed on our growth pattern. It hasn't deviated at all, which is just amazing.
That's fantastic, and kudos to you and your principals for ensuring kids were still making the growth. So just to kind of summarize, what I think I heard you saying is that you're using these longitudinal data pieces and measures and comparing individual performance to a national measure so that you can really understand, are your students where they need to be year over year?
Exactly. And like I said, at my level, looking at 40 schools and we do 3rd grade through 8th grade testing. And so I use those, and my awesome administrative assistant used to even color code things for me. So it was even easier for me to tell. But it was about looking for the trouble spots, right? So and then being able to look at last year's scores to see, is this a teacher problem? Is this a classes problem? Is it a school-wide issue? So then you can look, when you have to dig down deeper into the data to see where's the problem. And then be able to have those conversations with the principal about that.
Makes a lot of sense. Yes.
So,
yes, Dr.
the
Hobson?
diocese, well, I was just going to say, if you want me to move on about how the Diocese of Kansas City St. Joe, how we approach data and the tests that our schools participate in. They also do the ACRE assessment. We do that at 3 grade levels, so 5th grade, 8th grade, and then 11th grade, to get an idea of their faith growth through their time in our buildings. And we usually take that assessment in November. And then we have a committee of principals that looks at that data and helps us decipher where our strengths are overall as a diocese. And then if there are areas that we want to strengthen, how we might approach that, how our schools might be able to approach that. We also take the Iowa assessments. We do the Iowa assessments in the springtime. So our schools just started that assessment. The testing window is open. And then this current school year, we implemented where all of our schools also are taking the Iowa Flex assessments or the benchmarking 3 times a year. So they K through or 3rd grade through 8th grade has to take it. And then we do have some schools that have opted for K1, 2, or a combination of those grades to take the assessment as well, just to get some data on those younger students. And so we took it at the beginning of the school year and then right before Christmas break, and then mid-February. And then so we have all of that data. for our schools and principals to look at and to be able to see growth through the year, which has been really awesome for our schools and principals to have access to. And then those are, those benchmarks help predict how well they're going to do on the Iowa assessment. And so we'll be able to compare and see growth from last year, from Iowa assessment to Iowa assessment, but then also to see how the Iowa Flex benchmarking really supported that.
You've been looking at.
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just going to ask. So you've been looking at the longitudinal report with Iowa Flex?
Yes, absolutely. And so it's kind of nice, and Linda could probably talk to this a little bit now, because some of our schools piloted the Iowa Flex last school year, took it twice. So they have a little bit more of that longitudinal data to look at from student to student, but it is, I think that's really helpful, and it has really helped in data meetings at each of our schools to really focus in on what skills our students need some additional support in, or what they know when they're doing really, really well, and how we might be able to help that even more.
Thank you. So along with that, we wanted to ask about, and you've shared a little bit about at the diocesan level, looking at that longitudinal data for spring assessments, fall, winter benchmarking as well. But we wanted to kind of focus a little bit as well on how it's used for measuring that school growth and those important decisions that are made using some of that data as well.
So I can speak to this part, Karen, if you're okay with that. So I am on a committee on a school leadership team with our superintendents. We take the scores from the Iowa assessments and do comparisons across the board with all of the apples to apples. We go K through 8 schools. We take the information from there. We see what the levels are at each of the schools. Our schools are also broken down into pods, where there are 3 to 4 schools that are meet together, and the principals kind of have this group to collaborate also with. But we take that information, and then we're able to see from a bird's eye view in our diocese, where are we having issues? And Dr. Vader, I wish we could say that we didn't see any losses through COVID. It didn't happen everywhere, but that issue really showed up in math for us, if we were going to pick an area, and that's the area we chose this year. So as a team, we decided in K-8 schools, we made a SMART goal for all of the schools to be able to work towards accelerating scores for a certain number of percentage points. And that goal was made by the principals, spread to the rest of the principals, and everybody's working towards that at the same time. Now, along with that, the other principals got the same data that we had to take a look at. And what that does allow us to do is to pinpoint those areas where we need to keep the growth going. Now, if you're looking at a percentage, you're also looking at the fact that if you have kids who really did get it, then you've got even a wider spread in the amount of teaching that needs to be happening. So UDL and differentiated learning has really become a big piece of what we have to concentrate on. So we make sure that we are accessing appropriate data so we know which students there are who need help in certain areas. And that is sort of where I feel the Iowa Flex data has come into play. We were one of the pilot schools for it last year. So at this point, we have 5 data points for each child. When the reports come out, there are 5 separate scores, one for math, and then another sheet for reading. And it's invaluable in talking with parents about where we see challenges for students, or we see them really doing well. It is broken down in grades 3 through 8 in the learning standards, and they are given like a high, medium, and low in those areas also. So teachers can really dig in and they can group children, or they know how to differentiate the learning for those children who really need it the most. And then those who do really, really well, then they need to be pushed. And we know that at that point too, as far as their grade level goes. The students who need special services, we're able to do our RTI on a much better level because we can use that as one of the points to be able to triangulate data and see, was this just a bad testing day for this child, or overall, are we seeing these issues? We make those growth goals, we evaluate them, and then start over from scratch the next year and see where we were, see where we are, and then look for that next weakness area.
That's really helpful from your district about kind of how you're using Iowa and Iowa Flex to really understand grow throughout the year. And it sounds like both dioceses are using a lot of the longitudinal data to ensure that kids are making the right level of growth year over year. Are either of you using, we just had a question in the Q&A box, are either of you using Iowa or even another assessment like the COGAT for advanced placement identification or for gifted identification? And if so, could you talk a little bit to how you're using something like the Iowa to understand which students are ready for that advanced academic opportunity?
Heather, I see you shaking your head. Why don't you go first?
We actually use, our public school provides it's called EER, which is an accelerated gifted program for students. There's certain criteria that is required for them to be eligible or just considered. And we look at basically their overall scores in their ELA and their math composites to determine which students are ready to be able to tackle that. Even though we don't grade in second grade, we utilize those third grade scores for sure to even invite students to be considered. And once they're considered, then the public school does more formal testings through IQ to determine which ones are eligible. I believe they have to have an IQ of 127 or higher to be eligible to participate. So we use it on both ends of the spectrum, but we also use it for those students that are accelerated. It's an opportunity for us as well to know, as far as groupings within classrooms, if you are differentiating instruction, which students are good mentors for those that maybe are on target or struggle a little bit to be able to create classroom groups within the school setting to kind of be able to differentiate and focus your efforts on those that need more assistance. So we kind of look at not just the longitudinal, but we look at the profile as well to determine that.
I wish I could say we have a program in my area where the students would be tested and receive special services in gifted ed, but we don't. What we do is we call it special services team, student success team. They are interventionists and they work with students at every point along the way. And so our students who need to be, and we call it pushed, don't get more homework, but they would get an assignment or a different kind of project to do that would cause more problem solving or a deeper dive into whatever it is that they were learning too. But it is those numbers that become very helpful to know that, a score on a test isn't a one-off and that the student really is progressively showing these same sorts of trends.
Now, on that same line too, we use for our incoming 8th graders, we use the Iowa assessments specifically in the area of math computation and comprehension to determine which students are eligible to take algebra their 8th grade year, which for us, it's equivalent of high school freshman algebra 1 class. And so we use those scores, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade scores to determine, because we want to look to make sure there's consistency across the board, that it wasn't just a fluke that they scored so well, had a great test day, to make them eligible to participate in algebra their 8th grade year. Our diocese as a whole also has what's called Aquinas Academy, where we look at testing scores to determine, and that's a summer camp for kind of like the higher achiever students. Would you agree, Dr. Vader?
Yeah, it's an enrichment opportunity for them. Yeah.
So we look at those
Awesome.
testing scores across the board to determine which students are cognitively ready to tackle some of those, more of an enrichment summer camp for them. So.
The only thing I would add for the higher end is, you know, sometimes in the classroom, a student doesn't really perform at the level they should be. And sometimes even when they're gifted, they maybe are a distraction or can be a behavior problem, or you think something's going on here. And looking at those COGAT scores has really identified some kids for us to see these are really gifted kids, and they're just not being instructed in the way that maybe they need, or maybe it's that there is some sort of a learning disability, because you can be gifted and have a learning disability at the same time. So it helps give us that information and be able to talk to the parents about it, to say, look, there's a lot going on with your kiddo here. And so we just need to find the way to help them out to become, you know, the student that they really can be.
Perfect. And Dr. Vader, do you want to share about your grade equivalent scores that you all use?
Yeah, well, this is what I was talking about getting that 50,000 foot look at what's going on in the schools. That this is our ability to look at how each grade level in each of the schools is performing, being able to notice if there's something questionable happening, then being able to look back and see, is it always in 2nd grade that this problem is going on, or is it always, or is this class just a low, you know, for whatever reason scoring lower? Especially too, something that I think isn't mentioned a lot is the fact that so much of this depends on the size of the class as well, right? So I have several schools that have very, very small classes at a grade level. So if a class is performing lower over the course of the years, that's also going to give us an indication that maybe there is a kid in that smaller class who is not getting the help they need. But it gives us the opportunity to identify it way up there and then dig down into the data and see, where is this coming from? Is it the same kid every year? Is it the same kid in one area every year? Is it across the board? Whatever. But it's being able to look at that and identify when and where you need to drill down into it. This is the easiest way for me that I've found to be able to do it.
For us, we really like looking at that grade equivalent data. It's a great, it's an easy tool to use to share with your school advisory councils. It's very relatable because it's broken down into years and months of schooling. The other piece of the puzzle, she talks about the same kid in the same grade growing across the board. But for me also, I look at specific grade levels, and if there's a consistency in that grade level, specific grade being low consistently or consistently high, either way, it shows me, hey, we've got something great going on, or hey, I need to look at what resources we have available with that specific grade level to determine how do we get those scores to come back up. And unfortunately, sometimes maybe it is reflective of an educator and their ability to teach the content that needs to be taught at that. You hate to think that, but you know, it does give you a good window to see what's happening in that grade level.
At the diocesan level, while you're monitoring kind of the big picture data, Do you have specific criteria for when you do step in and intervene, or how do you work with principals at the school level to really coach them up on making the right steps? And principals, please jump in from your perspective as well, but really curious how that kind of at the diocesan level, how you make the decisions to really focus in on a specific school, and what your process is of helping that school through whatever problem that they're trying to solve.
Well, neither one of them would have any idea what that would require, because I haven't had to have that. I'm not bringing those people on. No, I'm joking. No, but really it is truly a conversation, right? So if I've noticed that there's for example, I'll give you an example. We have a very, very small school that the real worrisome, the red light, is when you have several grade levels that are scoring below the national average. Our diocesan average is traditionally higher than the national average. Okay, so if your school has several grade levels that are scoring below the national average, then something's going on. And I have a school where there were several grade levels that were scoring below the national average. So then that becomes a conversation of what's going on here. Well, in this case, it wasn't a situation where you had a particular teacher or a particular problem. What was happening was this was the third principal they've had in 4 years. And so you had, things can impact how kids perform on tests. So it was a situation where the teachers felt uncertain, the kids felt uncertain, they had another brand new principal who, there was a lot of things going into the mix on that. But what we did was I was talking with them about how to establish a culture of security within their school, talking to them about the fact that the teachers needed to reassure the students that no matter what happened, the school was always their safe place to be, and all of that. So by the time the next year rolled around, we were already seeing improvement on that. It's not always a directly educational issue, right? But I wouldn't have even known it was going on because I can't be in the school every day. So I didn't know that was happening to the culture of the school until it was reflected in the test scores, right? So it's not just about the academics, it's about the whole picture, if that makes sense.
No, absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. And I think it's really interesting to hear from the district level, because you obviously are not in the weeds with the data as much as a principal or a teacher is, but what your criteria are for engaging with the school on a deeper level and helping them make the growth that you need to see them make.
Right.
So we want to look next at the school level and really looking at measuring student performance, and specifically from the classroom as well. If you can share some insights as to some of those processes and what you do as well.
So at St. Brendan here, we are a preschool through 8th grade school, and we have one class per grade level. And our grades 6 through 8th are changing teachers each hour for different subject areas. We meet annually as a school right after testing results come out. And so I have a PD day set aside just to look at the data and really go through it together. So one of the things that we do is the teachers, because we take it in the fall, the teachers from the previous school year want to see how the scores reflected what they taught and what they did with the students. And so they meet with the current year teachers to go over all of that information. They look at the grade equivalency, but then after they kind of see what happened as a class, they go student by student. And they're looking to see how did that student perform compared to how they were projected to perform based on their COGAT score. And then they can have shared conversations about what happened the previous school year. And that was really important, especially coming back from COVID. We did identify some of the essential standards that they needed to hit and reteach from the previous school year that maybe didn't get taught very well at the end of the school year. Those conversations happened, and then the teacher knew, well, maybe we didn't get to really dig deep into something with geometry, for instance. So then they would have to really double down on that this year. So they look at the different areas and really go into it even farther to see what kind of a question was it? Was it a knowledge-based question, or was it something that really had some higher order thinking going on? What type of questions were students missing? And look at what did they choose on that particular question to see, is it something that happened class-wide, or were students just guessing, you know, that type of thing. And then they also look at the other assessments we do. We use our STAR reading and STAR math for beginning of the year, middle of the year, end of the year assessments. And then we also have other things, you know, some DIBELS and some other phonics screeners that we use, that type of thing. So we look at what students did on those other assessments and see if that matches up with what they did on their Iowas. And that just gives us a little bit more information. As a principal, one of the things that I really look at is what professional development needs to come out of this. So I can see in some areas where, you know, we're just really still struggling with grammar and just not quite getting there. And so teachers have kind of used everything in their toolbox, and they need some more help and something to fill that toolbox with even more strategies. So maybe my professional development for that year is going to focus on grammar or whatever it is that our areas are for growth. And then I also look at maybe over time this keeps happening and it's just consistently lower. So then I need to look at curriculum decisions, and is there something that needs to be added or completely changed or revamped in that area. And that's been exciting because we have had some different curricula that we've chosen in both language arts and math, and it's been exciting to watch over, you know, 3 to 5 years, how do those scores change over time.
For myself, because I'm on the same page here, Catherine and I are kind of cohorts in crime. Her and I have worked on the curriculum committee for the diocese. So when she talks about the essential standards when we were dealing with COVID, it was one of those things that was a key factor in where our teachers needed to lay their focus. And so that was a big deal. We have 2 classes. We're pre-K through 8 here at Immaculate Conception, 2 classes per grade level, although I do have 1 or 2 grades that have 3, because, you know, the needs are different in those grades. So we budgeted for that. So our kids actually get to start changing classes beginning in 4th grade, and it's a gradual process. So 4th grade, they change for 1 class, 5th grade, they change for 2 classes. And then in our middle school, we have 6 teachers. So there's 6 changes throughout the day. So like her, we too, once we get our scores, I allow meeting time to have the teachers meet with each other on grade level before grade level as well to look at how their kids did, because yeah, we do it in the fall, so it's a picture of what has been learned in the previous year. So that's kind of an interesting take compared to those that take those tests in the spring, because that's kind of a culmination of what's learned for the school year. So it's a great opportunity for them to start planning out how they need to map the rest of the year with their curriculum maps and things like that. So we, like Catherine, we also, on my level, take a look at the big picture to see where we're at. Our biggest focus is to make sure that there's been a full year of growth that happens on those longitudinal graphs. And if not, we need to determine, okay, let's look at the group. Let's look at what happened. Did we have any outlying circumstances that happened during the school year during this time? What kids are in that class? You know, it could very well mean that I had a teacher out on maternity sub and out for the half of a year. And so that unfortunately does affect things somewhat when you're looking at the big picture. So we also use STAR assessments, math and reading, beginning, middle, and end of year. We also have resource SPED teachers that also do early literacy assessments for some of our younger students that have been kind of on our radar from the get-go. So we have a big picture to see where we need to start providing accommodations and interventions for our students. So.
It's exciting to hear all the collaboration going on between teachers of each grade level and all the considerations you're looking at with the data and questions to think about. It's so powerful. And the professional development that comes out of it is amazing that you both spoke about. Linda, do you want to share?
Sure. So we are preschool through 8th grade as well. We have one class of 3-year-old preschool, and then actual pre-kindergarten, we have 2 classes. Kindergarten, we have 4 classes, and then we combine those so that we have 3 at each grade level all the way up through 8th then, which makes for wonderful PLC teams. So they collaborate 1 day a week during their plan time. And during that time, they work on looking at student outcomes and deficiencies. We start the changing classes in 4th grade also in a gradual fashion up to the point so that 5th and 6th grade do go to 6 different teachers also. And then when they're in 7th and 8th, they do the very same thing. In order for, you know, all 6 of those teachers to have a really good idea of what's going on with each of the children, there's no way they could do that best without meeting on a consistent basis. So what we do after they take the Iowa Flex test in the fall is sit down, take a look at each of the standards and the students' ability levels on those. And we keep those in mind as we are working towards, you know, mid-year and then finally end of year also. But it is amazing how a child who comes across us not doing very well in reading will be that same student who's not doing well in math, doing word problems, and not doing well in science and social studies when they are trying to pull out facts or data. And a lot of it has to do with the fact they just don't read well. It bleeds over into all the different subjects. So the grade levels, as far as, you know, dealing across the board, we do quarterly meetings that talk about scope and sequence in every curricular area. And what I've found since COVID, because we were talking about the idea that some standards didn't get covered during certain periods of time, or they get to the end of the year and they still have this they need to take care of. As long as everyone has an awareness of that, then we can make sure we're not leaving gaps in the children's education. But the collaborative part of it is just really important. We are also able, through the Iowa Flex scores, then 3 times a year, to take a look at how an individual homeroom is doing compared to the average of the diocese schools. So teachers know if we are up to par or we're not. Again, because we have individual reports on each child also, then we can dig down. And I think, I don't remember, Catherine, if it was you that was saying, then you dig down and you're taking a look at what's going on with these kids. Again, though, when you're looking at the homeroom piece, especially at the younger grades, we do Iowa Flex from kindergarten through 8th grade, so we have data on them all the way across. But if there is consistently a class where they are not doing as well, then again, I'm coaching. I am working with the teacher. I'm trying to figure out what it is that's different. But more than anything else, I sit in on their PLC meetings. So I'm hearing what, bringing up some questions, having them discuss specific pieces of their assessment of learning so that they can share those ideas. The teachers who do so well have a whole lot more information than I do because I don't teach that curriculum. They do, but they have things to actually look at and discuss when they have that data in front of them. From the school-wide data then, I am able to look at, again, as that's Catherine and Heather were saying, where do we need professional learning? What do we need to do to make it better? So, yeah.
One of the things that our diocese did this year was we brought in Chris from Riverside to meet with each principal, and then each principal was invited to bring 2 teacher leaders to this training, and we did one day in September and one day in January. And Chris Juarez went through in a wonderful fashion of how to use the Iowa assessment reports to really be able to dig down and figure out where students' strengths lie and what are some areas of improvement. And then he spent the second session in January with us, really looking at the Iowa Flex reports and how to use those as a school-based report, as an individual class report, and then also as the individual student reports. So our goal was, we knew this was important, and so we wanted to make sure that our schools had a principal and at least two other members, so 3 people in the building that understood how to read those reports and could help teams decipher areas that need some support and what areas they're doing really well in, to be able to really drive those discussions, whether it's in team meetings or PLCs. Each school is able to set that up however they choose to do that, however the school administrator chooses to do it. And we're finding more and more of our schools are following in Linda's footsteps, where they have dedicated time every week to really look at data and really see where our children are being successful and what are some areas that they really need some additional support in. So that has been, that was a huge investment for our diocese this year to bring the trainer in, but it's because we know that's important. And if we are mandating that all of our schools take these assessments, the Iowa Flex and the Iowa assessment, we want to make sure that they know how to use that data effectively.
Yeah, if I could, I'm sorry. No, I was just going to say, I'm glad you brought that up, Karen, because the training that is made available is great too. We did our training too with our principals and encouraged them to bring teachers with them as well, and it was great. It was very helpful.
The power of teachers being a part of all the decision making as well is amazing, and the dedicated time for looking at the data with everybody, all stakeholders involved, that's so powerful. So we want to look now at the classroom level. I know you all are doing some amazing things as well, and students being advocates of looking at their data as well. Do you want to share what you all are doing?
Yeah, so I mentioned some of these before. We administer the assessment in the fall, and so then compare the data with the other assessments that we are using within our school, and the teachers get together to really dig into that information. One of the things that I really make sure that the teachers do during that PD day is identify overall some of the strengths and areas that they can see some growth, and then what are the specific areas of improvement, and develop a plan. And they have to provide to me a little bit of what their plan was to address any of those holes. And then that's also a time for them to request from me what other help or guidance they need. So they can say, I see that this keeps happening. This is an area that the students need improvement in, but I don't know what else to do. So we have our monthly meetings, and it also gives another opportunity for them to say, you know, I'm trying this, I'm not really seeing the growth that I would like. What else can I do? And then the teachers also identify individual students that need some additional help. That helps us to see who needs to go to our resource teachers a little bit more. It's just one more piece of information to see what they may need to do with those resource teachers. Right after that, we have parent-teacher conferences. So it's really helpful to me to do this in the fall, because I can print off those scores. They receive their, both for COGAT and then for the Iowa, they receive the percentile ranking. And then we also go ahead and print off the grade equivalent longitudinal data, so that they can see over time how they have changed and what we would have expected them to do compared to what they did this year. So it gives an opportunity for us to sit down with parents to really talk about the data that they get on those sheets and what that means and what they can do at home to help their child too. And then after that, it's teachers kind of monitoring the progress with other assessments that they do within their classroom.
For us, again, fall administration, usually in October, we really look at those longitudinal graphs. And like I said earlier, we usually take that January meeting to really kind of drill down and look at things, specific students. My resource team really looks closely at those kids that they're currently working with to see if there's been any significant change, if their interventions and their accommodations are working, and what they need to shore up. I think the biggest piece now is that we are given, our diocese is given certain PD time to work. Like Linda was saying earlier, they have different pods of principals that work together. We call ours regions. And for me, I'm in Jefferson City, and so I can probably throw rocks at probably 5 area Catholic schools within my region. So we meet quite often as principals to talk about principal stuff, but we also have the opportunity on certain times of the year to get our teachers together. And we have set days that our school gets with the other local schools in my area to have teachers come together and talk together about what's happening in their classrooms. Because my biggest belief is that we are our best resource. And so anytime that I can get my teachers together, either on grade level or as older teachers of older students on content area, to discuss what's happening in their classrooms, what are their scores looking like, where were their deficiencies, where did we really excel, and why? What are you using in your classroom that is helping you be successful? Because when Dr. Vader sends out the diocesan information, as principals, we are privy to know where we are compared to other schools. And so not that it's a competition on my part, because, I'm not competitive at all. She's laughing at me. But it's a great opportunity for me to say, okay, I have, 2 schools within our city limits that are right down the street for me. Why are my scores higher, or why are my scores lower compared to them? And what conversations can we have to figure out what's the best practice, what's being successful, and to be able to share and move forward, because ultimately it's for the children and we want them to do well. But also as educators, we need to improve our craft and make sure that we're doing the best that we can in what's happening in our classrooms. So I think that's one of the biggest things that we've started in the last couple of years that has really turned into a great opportunity for professional development with our teachers across different schools in our area. So yeah, that's what we do.
Okay, so the Iowa Flex scores really do set a basis for a lot of the conversations that we have. Along with that, we have the Iowa testing that would be from the previous year, along with DIBELS that is given at the younger grades, and then classroom assessments. And we are working on common assessments among grade levels to make sure that all of the standards are covered appropriately. And then the teachers can do a direct comparison of how the kids are doing. They don't all have to teach it the same way. Everybody has their own flavor in their classroom. But if the students are to achieve certain standards, then those tests should be made by them in advance. And they know what it is that the kids need to know by the time they get there. I just pulled some paper that I still had sitting here because we were re-reviewing them again. But on January 3rd, we sat down in those scope and sequence conversations, and I've got a report from my fourth through eighth grade teachers talking about how the scores had gone from fall to winter, what they were going to have to do, and setting goals for themselves again for the second half of the school year. Same thing for social studies, same thing for science, and even our specials teachers get involved because they have so many opportunities to get the kids to find that, hey, we talk to each other, and actually you're learning in every one of these classes. And reading, math, social studies, science can be a part of all of these things that we're doing. So that becomes a big part of it also. By the time we take the spring testing, and we did the spring Iowa Flex, so they've had conversations within their grade levels, but our kids are right now involved in the Iowa assessments, and it won't be until the end of the school year until we have the chance to sit down and truly, I hope, celebrate how well we did in looking at the scores all along the way incrementally, and then being able to celebrate with them. But I really think a lot of this data investigation is the lead up to goal making. So as a diocese, we make goals as a pod of teachers, as a pod of principals, as principals overall in K-8 schools, and then in grade levels also. But what it really comes down to is the students and having them understand their own progression. So, hey, thanks. All right, so this is a student who has done very well. He's in second grade, but they keep track of their own data. So they do the Iowa Flex testing, and you can see he showed his reading scores and where he started out in the fall, and then in the winter, and then in the spring. His math scores, he was at a 5 to start out with. Now these tests, I don't know if you guys know about them, but it's like taking the GRE. You know, if they get a question right, then it gives them a harder one. If they get one wrong, it gives them an easier one, and it just keeps them going. So when this kiddo picked up on the December testing, he had to do just as well and then keep doing better in order to keep getting a 5 as a score. So it's not like the same test 3 times. Every time it's different, but every time he has shown that ability level. And this is a child who we are pushing to receiving assistance in making sure he's continuing to be challenged. This teacher in particular uses a program called A to Z Reading. And she has the kids read the books and answer the questions. And then on a monthly basis, they gauge how they're doing. And then we have a computer program that's called Reflex Math. I don't know if you've done it. It's basic facts. And this child started out really high. The one on the left, the graphing on the left, shows how he did in addition and subtraction. And he got up to 100% by October. So he started multiplication and division. His facts were all complete by the time he got there. And I can't see because my eyes aren't that good. But by like January, he had nailed it. And he's moving on to another program called Frax that's all about fractions. So having the students then set their own goals and what they're going to look like, I think brings it, all the way from that diocesan level down to individual students and them realizing okay, if I am able to do this, then, I'm going to be moving on to something that's even more interesting for me. So that's sort of the shortened version of how we use data at our school.
So powerful to have students involved. Great. Thank you. I know we're about out of time. I don't know if there's any additional, I know we had key insights to talk about as well, but as the time kind of gets away from us, if there's anything else you want to share, either of you.
I think one important piece too, we talked about a lot about longitudinal graphs, is also looking at that student's individual profile. Because if you have a kid that is scoring low in a specific area, but he seems to do very well in the classroom, trying to figure out where that breakdown happens. And when you look at those subtests at the bottom of that report, it really gives you an insight on where that child is either performing quite well or where they're very deficient. And those reports are very, very useful when you are identifying students that possibly have a learning disability and need to be referred to the public school for academic testing. So those are the reports that we use specifically for those types of needs for students. So I just wanted to kind of throw that in there, that we don't just look at longitudinal graphs or grade equivalents. We also look at those specific things when we have students that are struggling.
So I see our whole community as being partners in the educative process. And our goal is to, number one, get them to heaven. But number two, we want to meet all those standards by the end of the school year. And the only way that can happen is if we identify the progress along the way and any challenges that we have. So we are able to, I think, better identify where the issues are, or where the students are who already know this stuff and they need to be able to continue on with their work. Those kinds of things could be gummed up. And I know that, Heather, you said it so eloquently that sometimes it does involve the educator in the classroom, if you can see those variances in that data in that specific area, and the coaching that can happen. But I do see also that we are in a place in education where we have to differentiate, and just standing in front of the classroom and teaching a lesson isn't working. You have to be able to make sure you're hitting, those students that learn by hearing, and those visual learners and those kinesthetic learners. You have to make sure that if kids aren't getting it, that you are able to bring it to them in the format that's going to help them the best. And then specifically moving everyone forward without having huge lapses in anyone's learning. So that's the value of what I see in using these assessment pieces. And parents love the reports. You sit down at a parent-teacher conference with one of these reports, and you're able to talk them through what's going on, and they have such a better understanding. Always point out those sparkles. I call them sparkles, the things you're really good at. You point those out first, and then you can talk about the challenges, and they, giving them things that you're planning to do to help them. So yes, that's I think a bonus to the whole learning community at this point, is having this kind of information.
So powerful. Love the sparkles. Great. So yes, we are about out of time for today. We appreciate all of our audience. We appreciate our panelists being with us today. And we would love to hear from you all who have joined us, share your great stories with us through social media and emailing us and letting us know how you all are using data to affect student learning and growth in the classroom, in your school, and in your district as well. So I don't know, Anna, that we had any time for questions, but if there's anything else you want to share too.
No, I just want to thank you everyone for joining the call today. It's really, really interesting to think about how we look at data from the diocese and our district level all the way down to what's happening in the classroom. So really appreciate your time. And thank you, Allison, for facilitating.
Absolutely. So thank you all for joining us today, and hope you can join us for some upcoming webinars in the future. So thank you very much and have a great day.